My name is Angela Hubert, and the ICE agent's fist connected with my jaw outside the 7-Eleven on Roosevelt Avenue in Queens. Right there, under the fluorescent glow of the storefront and the elevated subway tracks rumbling overhead. The punch was fast and brutal, professional in its efficiency. I tasted blood instantly, felt my vision blur for half a second before training kicked in and steadied me. I didn't go down. 19 years in the Navy taught me how to absorb impact, how to stay upright when your body wants to collapse. I stood there, grocery bags still clutched in my left hand, while Agent Vasquez shook out her knuckles and stepped back into formation with her team. "Hands behind your back," she barked. The sidewalk was crowded, even at 9 p.m. Jackson Heights never sleeps. Street vendors selling mangoes and elotes, families walking home from dinner, teenagers clustered outside the bodega. All of them froze, watching another immigration raid unfold on a street corner that had seen dozens. I didn't move. 19 years taught me more than how to take a punch. It taught me how to assess tactical situations, how to calculate odds, how to recognize when compliance would make things worse instead of better. I said, "Hands behind your back." Vasquez moved closer, her 3 team members fanning out around me in practiced formation. They wore the standard ICE tactical gear, bulletproof vests over dark uniforms, badges gleaming, radios crackling with dispatch chatter. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, because I was dressed in jeans and an NYU sweatshirt with grocery bags in my hands, was that the woman she'd just punched wasn't some undocumented worker they could intimidate into silence. The stillness she mistook for fear was combat-learned discipline from briefing rooms in Bahrain and operations in the Persian Gulf. A man with a fruit cart started recording on his phone. A woman pulled her children closer. The teenager outside the bodega had his phone up too, live streaming probably, the blue glow of the screen reflecting off his face. "Ma'am, I need to see identification," Vasquez said, her hand moving to her cuffs, "and I need to know your immigration status." I touched my jaw carefully, checking for breaks. Nothing fractured, but I'd have a hell of a bruise. Blood dripped onto my sweatshirt from my split lip. "I'm a U.S. citizen," I said quietly, the same calm voice I'd used to give orders during tense maritime operations. "I live 2 blocks from here, and you just committed assault. Resisting a federal officer is a crime." I wasn't resisting. I was standing on a public sidewalk with groceries. Her eyes narrowed. "We have reasonable suspicion to detain anyone in this area. There's been reports of illegal activity. There's been reports." I let the words hang. "That's interesting, because I've lived here for 3 years, and the only illegal activity I've seen is ICE agents harassing citizens without cause." One of her team members, a younger guy with a fresh academy look, shifted uncomfortably. Vasquez's jaw tightened. "You want to make this difficult? We can make it difficult." She reached for my arm. I stepped back, not aggressive, just creating space. "Don't touch me again. That's obstruction. That's self-defense. You already assaulted me once. I'm not giving you another opportunity." The crowd was growing. More phones appeared. Someone shouted in Spanish, "Grábalo todo. Record everything." The fruit cart vendor was narrating his video in rapid-fire Mandarin. A woman across the street had her phone pressed to her ear, probably calling the legal hotline number plastered on flyers throughout the neighborhood. Vasquez looked around, seeing her operation deteriorate into a public relations disaster. ICE raids in Queens were common. Roosevelt Avenue was a known target, a heavily immigrant corridor where agents conducted regular sweeps. But this was going sideways fast. "Last warning," she said. "Produce identification, or you're coming with us." I should have shown my military ID right then. Should have pulled out the credentials that would have ended this immediately. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she'd punched first and asked questions later. Maybe it was the memory of all the times I'd watched raids on this same street, seen families separated, seen people dragged into vans for the crime of looking like they didn't belong. "I don't have to prove anything to you," I said. "This is a fishing expedition. You're stopping people based on appearance, which is profiling, which is illegal. We're conducting lawful immigration enforcement. You're harassing residents of an immigrant neighborhood and hoping someone doesn't know their rights." Her face flushed. "You want to be a lawyer? We can discuss it at the detention center." She grabbed my wrist. I didn't resist, but I didn't help either, letting my weight go dead, forcing her to work for it. The other agents moved in, one grabbing my other arm, the young guy looking increasingly uncomfortable with the whole situation. That's when the black SUV pulled up to the curb, and a woman in a crisp ICE supervisor's uniform stepped out. Her face already showing the irritation of someone who'd been pulled from dinner to deal with a situation that should never have escalated. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how we got here, you need to understand how I ended up on Roosevelt Avenue in the first place. I was born in Brooklyn to Jamaican immigrants who had come to New York in the 80s. My father was a taxi driver, my mother a nurse at Kings County Hospital. They'd done everything right, applied for visas, waited years, followed every rule. By the time I was born, they were citizens, but they never forgot what it was like to be watched, questioned, suspected. I grew up hearing stories about my mother being stopped by immigration agents outside the hospital where she worked, about my father being asked for papers during routine traffic stops, about cousins who'd been detained despite having green cards, held for hours until someone could verify their status. "Don't ever give them a reason," my mother used to say. "Be perfect. Be beyond reproach. Because they're always watching people who look like us." So I was perfect. Straight A student, ROTC in high school, Navy scholarship to NYU. I joined at 18, driven by the same thing that drove my parents to immigrate, the belief that service would equal belonging, that achievement would equal acceptance. The Naval Academy at Annapolis nearly broke me, not the physical demands or the academic rigor, but the constant, exhausting labor of proving I belonged. Fellow midshipmen who assumed I was there for diversity quotas, instructors who called me by other black women's names despite us looking nothing alike, the subtle suggestions that maybe I'd be happier in a support role rather than command track. I graduated in the top 15% of my class, got commissioned, did my first deployment on a destroyer in the Mediterranean, proved myself over and over until the proof became undeniable. Made lieutenant at 25, lieutenant commander at 30, and last year, at 37, I pinned on captain's eagles. 19 years of service, multiple deployments to the Persian Gulf, the Mediterranean, anti-piracy operations off Somalia. Commendations I kept in a storage unit because my apartment was too small and bragging wasn't the point. The point was belonging. The point was earning the right to walk down an American street without being questioned. But here's what I learned. It doesn't matter how many years you serve. Doesn't matter what rank you achieve. If your face doesn't match what someone thinks American looks like, you'll always be suspect. I'd moved to Jackson Heights 3 years ago, drawn by the neighborhood's diversity, by the feeling of being surrounded by people who understood what it meant to build lives in a country that viewed you as perpetually foreign. I loved Roosevelt Avenue's chaos. The vendors, the languages, the smell of food from 6 different continents within a single block. But I also saw the raids, watched them from my apartment window, or walked past their aftermath. Agents in tactical gear, vans with darkened windows, families crying on street corners. The targets were usually obvious. Day laborers waiting for work, vendors without permits, people who looked vulnerable. I'd never been stopped, not once in 3 years. Maybe because I was careful, always carried ID, always dressed professionally even off duty, always maintained the crisp bearing that comes from 2 decades of military service. Or maybe I'd just been lucky. Tonight I'd been coming home from the grocery store. Same route I took twice a week. Same NYU sweatshirt I'd worn 100 times. Same streets I'd walked without incident. But tonight was different. Tonight there was a raid in progress, a big one, with multiple vans, a dozen agents, The kind of operation designed to sweep up as many people as possible. And tonight, Agent Vasquez was working the perimeter, stopping anyone who fit her profile of suspicious, which apparently meant me, walking with grocery bags and brown skin. She'd approached fast, aggressive from the first word. Stop. Immigration enforcement. I'd stopped. Confused. I live here. I need to see identification. For what? I'm walking home from the store. We're conducting an operation. Everyone in this area needs to verify their status. That's when I should have shown my ID. Should have pulled out my military credentials and ended it. But something in her tone, the presumption, the assumption of guilt, made me dig in. I'm a U.S. citizen. I don't have to prove that to you. If you're a citizen, showing ID shouldn't be a problem. If I'm not doing anything illegal, you don't have cause to demand it. Her face had hardened. You're in an enforcement zone. That gives me cause. An enforcement zone? This is a public street in Queens. A public street where we're conducting lawful operations. Lawful profiling, you mean? That's when she punched me. No warning, no escalation, just a fast strike to shut me up. Professional. Practiced. The kind of violence that comes from knowing you can get away with it. Now, with her hand on my wrist and her team surrounding me, Supervisor Linda Martinez stepped out of her SUV and took in the scene with the weary expression of someone who'd seen this movie before. Vasquez, what's going on? Subject was uncooperative, refusing to show identification. Subject was grocery shopping, I interrupted. And your agent assaulted me without cause. Martinez's eyes went to my bleeding lip, then to the crowd of phones recording everything. Vasquez, did you strike this woman? She was resisting. Was she? Or was she exercising her constitutional rights? Martinez's voice had an edge now. She looked at me. Ma'am, I apologize for this situation. If you'll step over here, we can sort this out quickly. I'm not going anywhere with you. I kept my voice level. Your agent committed assault. There are 24 witnesses and probably a dozen videos. I want badge numbers, I want your supervisor's contact information, and I want to file a formal complaint. Martinez's expression shifted, recalculating. Ma'am, I understand you're upset. I'm not upset. I'm assaulted. There's a difference. If we could just see some ID, we can verify you're not involved in our operation and let you go. I don't have to prove I'm not involved in your operation. You have to have reasonable suspicion I am. And walking while brown isn't reasonable suspicion. Vasquez moved closer again. Ma'am, you're making this worse. Step back, Agent Vasquez. The voice cut through the noise like a blade. Everyone turned. A man in ICE tactical gear approached from one of the vans, but something about his bearing was different. Older, more weathered, with the kind of command presence that came from years of actual authority rather than borrowed intimidation. Field Operations Supervisor James Garrett stopped 3 feet away, his eyes moving from Vasquez to me, to my bloody lip. His face went very still. Captain Hubert? His voice carried shock and something that might have been horror. The street went silent. Vasquez's grip on my wrist loosened. I looked at Garrett, really looked, and felt recognition slam into me. He was older, grayer, wearing a different uniform, but I knew him. We'd served together 15 years ago when I was a lieutenant and he was a chief petty officer on the same destroyer group. Chief Garrett, I said quietly. It's Supervisor Garrett now, ma'am. But he looked at Vasquez, and his voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. Did you just punch a Navy captain? Vasquez's face drained. She didn't. She never said. She shouldn't have to. Garrett stepped closer to her, and despite being roughly the same height, he seemed to tower. You don't put hands on anyone without cause, and you sure as hell don't punch someone for asserting their constitutional rights. On a residential street in Queens, stopping people for walking home with groceries? He looked around at the crowd, at the phones, at the evidence of their fishing expedition. This is exactly the kind of operation that makes national news for all the wrong reasons. Martinez tried to salvage it. Supervisor Garrett, we had reports of illegal activity in this area. Reports? He said it the way I had, with the same skepticism. Let me guess, vague reports that justified a sweep of an entire immigrant neighborhood? She didn't answer. He turned back to me. Ma'am, I apologize. This should never have happened. Your apology doesn't undo the assault. No, ma'am, it doesn't. He pulled out his radio. I'm calling NYPD. This needs to be documented properly. You can't, Vasquez started. I can, and I am. You assaulted a Navy captain on a public street. That's not an immigration issue. That's criminal. The young agent who'd been looking uncomfortable throughout finally spoke up. Sir, I tried to tell her this didn't look right. Not now, Chen. Garrett kept his eyes on Vasquez. Badge off. Gun and cuffs secured. You're suspended pending investigation. You can't suspend me in the field. Watch me. He pulled out his phone, already dialing. And pray she doesn't press charges, because assault on a military officer carries federal penalties you really don't want to learn about. Police arrived within minutes. 2 NYPD patrol cars, lights flashing, adding to the spectacle. The officers took statements, photographed my injuries, reviewed footage from multiple witnesses' phones. The crowd had grown to maybe 50 people now, most filming, some cheering when Vasquez was ordered into a patrol car. One officer, a Latina woman who'd clearly worked this neighborhood for years, looked at the scene with disgust. Roosevelt Avenue again? How many times are they going to pull this crap? Until it stops working, I said quietly. She met my eyes. You pressing charges? I looked at Vasquez sitting in the back of the patrol car, her career imploding around her. Part of me wanted to say yes, wanted to watch her face the same consequences regular people face when they assaulted someone. But another part, the part that had spent 19 years navigating systems designed to protect their own, knew it wouldn't matter. Administrative action, I said finally. I want her badge. I want this on record, but I'm not interested in criminal charges. The officer nodded, understanding. Federal assault on a military officer would stick, you know. You've got video evidence, witnesses. I know. But she's not worth the fight. I touched my jaw, wincing. She's just a symptom. The disease is bigger. Garrett overheard. For what it's worth, ma'am, she'll be terminated, and I'll make sure this raid gets reviewed. The whole operation was sloppy from the start. Will it change anything? He hesitated. Probably not, but it's something. After the police finished, after Vasquez was driven away, after the crowd finally dispersed, Garrett walked me to my apartment building 2 blocks away. We didn't speak until we reached my door. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said again. When I transferred to ICE, I thought... He stopped, searching for words. I thought I'd be catching actual criminals, cartel members, traffickers, people who were actually dangerous. But most days, it's this. Raids on working people, families, kids. Because if I leave, they replace me with someone like Vasquez. Someone who sees everyone in these neighborhoods as the enemy. He looked back toward Roosevelt Avenue. At least when I'm here, I can push back. Stop some of the worst excesses. Is that enough? No, ma'am, it's not. He pulled out a card, handed it to me. My direct number, if you need anything. Documentation for your complaint, witness statements, whatever. Call me. I took the card. Thank you, Chief. It's just supervisor now. He almost smiled, but I appreciate the respect. And ma'am, for what it's worth, it's good to see you made captain. You earned it. After he left, I stood in my apartment, looking at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My jaw was swelling, the bruise already darkening. My lip needed butterfly stitches. I looked like I'd been in a fight, which I had, just not the kind I'd trained for. My phone buzzed. Text from my mother. You okay? Saw something on Twitter about ICE and Jackson Heights. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I'm fine. Just another day in paradise. But I wasn't fine. I was a Navy captain with 19 years of service, and I'd been punched on a street corner for the crime of looking like I didn't belong. No amount of rank, no number of years in uniform had protected me from that fundamental assumption. The video went viral overnight. Navy captain assaulted by ICE agent in Queens. Headlines screamed across social media. My face was visible this time. No blur, no anonymity. Just me, standing on Roosevelt Avenue with blood on my sweatshirt, while Agent Vasquez was led away in handcuffs. The Navy Public Affairs Office called the next morning. "Captain Hubert, we need to coordinate messaging." "No messaging. I'm not making this a Navy story." "With respect, ma'am, you're a Navy captain who was assaulted by federal agents. That's already a Navy story. It's a story about immigration enforcement run amok, about agents who see entire neighborhoods as suspect, about profiling that doesn't care about citizenship or service." Silence on the line. Then, "Understood, ma'am, but we'd like to issue a statement supporting you." "Issue whatever statement supports ending these kinds of operations. Otherwise, stay quiet." Vasquez was terminated within a week. The official report cited use of excessive force and conduct unbecoming a federal officer. The raid itself was deemed problematic, but not illegal. No policy changes, no systematic review, just one agent sacrificed to protect the larger operation. But something else happened. The video, the dozens of videos from different angles, became a teaching tool. Immigrant rights organizations used it in Know Your Rights workshops. Law schools screened it in constitutional law classes. It became evidence that citizenship alone wasn't protection, that service alone wasn't armor. I got letters, hundreds of them, from service members who'd faced similar harassment, from immigrants who'd been too afraid to fight back, from families who'd watched their neighborhoods turned into hunting grounds. One letter stood out, from a young woman in California who'd been considering military service, who'd believed, like I once did, that proving your loyalty would equal acceptance. "I thought if I served, they'd see me as American first," she wrote. "But you served for 19 years and they still punched you. So what's the point?" I sat with that letter for a long time, trying to find an answer that wasn't bitter. Finally, I wrote back, "The point isn't that service guarantees acceptance. The point is that service is worth doing regardless. Not to prove yourself to people who'll never accept you, but because the ideals are real, even when the people enforcing them aren't. Serve if it calls to you, but serve with open eyes. And when they punch you anyway, punch back. Not with fists, but with the law, with witnesses, with the truth they can't erase." I don't know if she found that satisfying. I'm not sure I did. 3 months later, I transferred to San Diego, accepting a new posting that would take me away from Roosevelt Avenue and its raids and its memories. But before I left, I walked that street one more time, past the 7-Eleven where Vasquez had hit me, past the fruit cart vendor who'd recorded everything, past the families still living under the shadow of the next operation. The neighborhood was the same, vibrant, loud, beautiful in its chaos, still targeted, still watched, still home to people who'd built lives in a country that treated them as perpetually foreign. I bought mangoes from the same vendor who recognized me and refused payment. "No charge for you, Captain. You stood up. That matters." I tried to pay anyway. He shook his head, smiling. "Your fight made my daughter brave. She reported an ICE agent who grabbed her last month. He got suspended. That's worth more than mangoes." Walking away, I realized that maybe that was the point. Not that one viral video would change the system, not that one agent's termination would end the raids, but that each small act of resistance made the next one possible. Each person who stood up made it easier for the next person to do the same. My name is Angela Hubert. I'm a Navy captain with 19 years of service, and I learned that belonging isn't something you earn through achievement or prove through loyalty. It's something you claim, defend, and fight for, over and over, in grocery store parking lots, and on street corners, with witnesses and cameras and the stubborn refusal to accept that your face makes you suspect. They'll always underestimate us, always assume we don't belong, always think their authority outweighs our humanity, right up until the moment we prove them wrong, and then make sure the proof goes viral.